she should not work for press secretary for, in my opinion, if this is how she conducts herself, for anyone. She shouldn't be press secretary for a lemonade stand, let alone the territorial defense of Ukraine. This is embarrassing behavior. Dylan, will you consider the role of spokesperson for Ukraine's territorial defense forces? I hear there is an opening. I would love to cover this with you, actually. I think you'd be great for this.
It's a very unfortunate situation.
This is a very just, I don't even know. I don't know what she's doing anymore. Sarah Ashton, she has, I don't know if she's fallen off her rocker. I don't know if I just didn't notice and she was always off of her rocker. I see people like digging up tweets or messages she made like 4 or 5 years ago. And like, I don't want to even go into that, because I think just what she has said in the last week or two speaks for itself, that she should not be the press secretary or press anything for the Ukrainian armed forces. And I understand that she said a lot of nice things about Ukraine and she's done a lot to try to help Ukraine, and that's fantastic. But if you're the press secretary of the armed forces, you need to be careful with your words. Sorry, of the territorial defense. You need to be careful with your words and not make it sound like you're asking for a journalist to be assassinated and then calling all of the Russians Mongol slaves, right? You shouldn't even be able to misinterpret what she's saying as that. That shouldn't even be possible. Can we cover that story together quick? Let's cover that story together quick, because a lot of you guys, I think, probably don't know about this. Let's get into it. So this is Sarah Ashton, and this is a hard story to... She follows me on Twitter, which basically means that we're best friends. That's how the internet works. She put out this message on September 13th, which is about 15 days ago now. And this is what she tweeted. Since there are several people asking for videos about my discussing it on Telegram and across social media channels, here's my latest episode of Russia Hates Truth. So this means she posted this, and then after posting it and getting questions about it, she decided to post it again. So she was really confident in this message. This wasn't like something she just kind of like just threw out there and didn't really think about it. She threw it out there, had time to think about it, and then threw it out there again on a separate platform, Twitter, right? The Russians and their supporters are gnashing their teeth as predicted. Now remember, she is the press secretary for the territorial defense forces in this. This isn't her personal YouTube channel.
I do just want to remind people, though, that we're in an area where the Russians are clearly targeting civilians.
You're out of frame, Patrick.
Okay,
you don't exist unless you're in frame.
Oh, God. Frenchman falls in the woods. I want to just emphasize that, like, you know, on the grand scheme of things, I think that this is still ultimately not a bad person. Like, we're up against, you know, she fought against people who are like literal, like, occupiers. And I think we do need to have, it's foolish. I don't think they were wrong to fire her. But you do have to keep that in perspective, that this is, a lot of the people that are criticizing her are scum and are like supporters of are supporters of a fascist government, not of like fascist cosplay.
Look, I don't like Wyatt Reed. I don't like a lot of these people who are coming out of the woodwork to drag her through the mud. But I think a little bit she deserves to get kind of dragged through the mud for the things she's saying as press secretary for the territorial defense forces.
They were right to fire her,
and
put it that way.
whether or not she's a good person, right? I don't really know how much that should come into the analysis of how we're like delving into her comments. But the things that she said, especially the second thing she said, is not things that good people express, and definitely in the way that she expressed it. Now, I'm not saying that she's the devil. All I'm saying is that this was terribly irresponsible behavior, and she gave ammunition to the Russians. That's what this is. Anyway, let's go through the comments. We've been talking about the comments without listening to the comments. Here's the first thing that she said that got her suspended. As you can see here, I'm sorry I'm using the Kiev Post. I don't like to use too much of oligarch aligned media.
Friend of mine likes to.
But it's okay, you know. I understand oligarch money is fantastic, but I'm kidding. As Sarah Ashton suspended as spokesperson for Ukraine's territorial defense, this is what she said that got her suspended and caused a lot of I thought it caused Josh Hawley and other U.S. congressmen and political commentators to comment on her for the first time and find out who she was for the first time.
Russia hates the truth that their obsessive focus on a Ukrainian volunteer is simply allowing the light of the Ukrainian nation's honesty to shine brightly. Next week, the teeth of the Russian devils will gnash ever harder, and their rabid mouths will foam in uncontrollable frenzy as the world will see a favorite Kremlin propagandist pay for their crimes. And this puppet of Putin is only the first. Russia's war criminal propagandists will all be hunted down, and justice will be served as we in Ukraine are led on this mission by faith in God, liberty, and complete liberation.
Also, the sad truth is that they won't be hunted down.
No, most of them will almost certainly get away.
Yeah.
But when somebody says hunted down, and this was my first original very charitable. Let me not hold my thought. Okay. My original interpretation, if I wanted to be as favorable as possible to her, was hunted down means gathering them all up and then putting them on trial for working as propagandists for state television. But that nuance is not expressed here. This sounds like she said, we're going to find all those people, those Russian propagandists, and we're going to fucking kill them. That's what it sounds like. And she's even saying, next week, this Russian propagandist will pay for their... She didn't add that nuance. And if she's the press secretary, she needs to add that nuance. Now, I don't know if she meant that nuance. I don't know if she didn't. You can give her the benefit of the doubt or not. That's up to you. Point is, as press secretary, you're supposed to make your points clear. You're supposed to make them concise. And you should not imply that the territorial defense is going to do something that it's not going to do. And the territorial defense released a statement where they basically came out and said, we respect humanitarian law, we respect international law, we would never target journalists. They shouldn't have to release that statement. They shouldn't have to come out and say that because of this. I see so many people dragging Sarah Ashton through the mud. Half of it's because she's trans. I'm going to be real. If we're talking about the American political scene, the trans panic has even infested the war in Ukraine.
Gray Zone titled one of their videos in a very transphobic way, I might add.
Gray Zone? Transphobic? I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
But the other half was, I think, at least semi-correct outrage at her saying something like this while press secretary. Look, if she wanted to, in her private life, while not press secretary, say something like these people who are pumping out propaganda, which in many instances advocates for ethnic cleansing, need to pay, she doesn't need to express that type of nuance because she's not working as press secretary. She can express that in her own private life. But she's press secretary for the territorial defense. So this is the first thing that got her suspended. Here's the other thing she said very recently, which I don't even know how to explain that. I'm just going to play the clip, okay? I'm just going to play the clip. One second.
And the reality is, Russians are not European. Russians, as Mr. Danilov was clear to say, Russians have a different culture. Russians are Asian. And ultimately, they do come from the Mongols. They do come from a grouping, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy, of people who are wanting to be slaves and want to be led just as it was from the days of Genghis Khan. And so I wish the rest of Europe and the Western world understood that Europe ends at Ukraine.
That Europe ends at Ukraine. You want to know what this... Now, she can come out and rephrase this if she wants to. But want to know what this sounded like first listening? The Russians aren't like us. They're not European. They're Asian Mongols, and they're Asian Mongol slave mentality. They're slaves. They're Asian Mongol slaves. And that's why Europe ends at Ukraine, because we're not like those Asian Russians who are Mongols. That's what it sounded like. It just sounded like anti-Asian racism, which is a problem in Ukraine. Who got this in her head? Who put this in? Did she always believe this? Or is she like talking to people in Ukraine somewhere?
So a lot of people are descendants of Genghis Khan.
That is true.
He made damn sure of that.
A lot of people are descendants of Genghis Khan. Am I a descendant of Genghis Khan? Are you a descendant of Genghis Khan?
We're Irish.
Probably not. But who knows? He did rape a lot of people. But why did she say this? Look, I can only bend my back so much to try to like rephrase and re-show. If again, she could, if I've heard people say, well, actually, Dylan, when I was talking to people privately, when you talk about the political machinations of the Russian system and how the barons descended from the Mongols, that's not what she said. She didn't add that nuance, important nuance. All that people are taking from this is that the Russians are slave Mongol Asians, and that's why they're not Europeans, and Europe ends at Ukraine because slave Mongol Asians. That's all people are taking from this. That's how everybody's viewing this. And you want to know how people are talking about it? Spokesperson. Even if she's suspended, I don't think she's been fired yet. Suspended. Spokesperson for territorial defense says we're fighting slave Mongol Asians, Russians. That's how it's going to be interpreted. That's how it's going to be put in the press. And again, I think she deserves the criticism. She should not work for press secretary for, in my opinion, if this is how she conducts herself, for anyone. She shouldn't be press secretary for a lemonade stand, let alone the territorial defense of Ukraine. This is embarrassing behavior. Like, if she wants to go volunteer and bring medical supplies here or there, or do her own thing to support Ukraine, that's fine. It doesn't sound like, really, in my mind, that she should be on a platform representing the Ukrainian armed forces in any capacity.
I wanted to add a comment too, that I think people here are pretty well aware that some of these propagandists are like an accidental gift to the cause, because they're just so goofy, just so vile, and like so wrapped up in like every other kind of bullshit that you could possibly imagine. I mean, that's like, who do they have advocating for them? Like Jackson Hinkle, like Andrew Tate. Like, it's you would want these like people to stop. I mean, I don't know, like, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. And I think that it's just, you know, it's like Jesus tap dancing Christ. Like, you couldn't pick dumber people to try to advocate for this.
Jesus tap dancing Christ. I like that phrase. That's fun. Don't say that in front of Bogdan. But I'm just so, this is so unbelievably disappointing, because she really was like given a lot of trust by the territorial defense to be their English speaking spokesperson. You know, having trans representation like that high level in the Ukrainian military was insane. It was incredible. And honestly, she got dragged through the mud a lot by the Ukrainian.
She's a good fighter too. And
she, from everything I heard, she's not like some fake like Call of Duty soldier either. So it was, and she got dragged, and territorial defense got dragged through the mud for even having a trans person in that position of power. I know right sector guys are very angry about it, especially. They were very angry about it. They were also angry about like everything recently LGBT. I remember I saw some right sector people going to like the Comfy chain store because it had like a rainbow logo during Pride Month, and they were so angry. They called it like backstabbing the nation during the Great Struggle or whatever.
But what's the crowd of Ukrainian people going to think of that on average? They're going to consider it very silly.
They're going to, of course, everybody, all the reactions I saw was like, what the fuck's wrong with you?
What is this? Like, that's the thing, that it's important to always remind that it's like when they put up the poster that has Russia with the SS symbol for the S's, it's unambiguous to people that that's a negative. So it's like, I think you have to always keep in mind what normal, regular people, how they will react to this stuff. And when you see it, it's like, what is this goofy
And that
shit?
brings us right back to Sarah Ashton. All my question to you guys is, if a normal person who isn't familiar with the war in Ukraine saw those two messages, and that's who she's supposed to be speaking to, they don't need Sarah Ashton to speak to Ukrainian speakers. That's not her job. Her job is to speak to English speakers and tell them about the war, give them about the updates on the front, right? And she did it in like the full North Korea style. And I'm not trying to like say that she lied, but if you watch her like things, I don't know if you guys have watched those North Korea style news segments where they're like staring into the camera and like, the great Kim Jong has once again set a new record in basketball.
I think
like
that's a bit unfair,
I'm not saying that that's the stuff she's reporting, but that's the style of what she said. Next
grandiose.
week, the teeth of the Russian devil will gnash harder, and their rabid mouth. Like, this is like
grandiose.
It's unbelievably grandiose in that style, even if the content of what she's reporting isn't to the same nonsense of the North Korean state. It was very similar to that. You want to know who gave me that comparison? It was our buddy in Kiev. You know the one. So if local Ukrainians are saying, it's kind of weird how she presents this, I think I'm justified in making that comparison. But again, her job was to speak to English-speaking audiences. And if the message English speakers are taking after watching this is, also, are you going to kill journalists? Or,
can I just
wait, just quickly. Or, you think all the Russians are just like slave Asians and that's why this war is being fought? I thought it was over freedom. I thought it was over democracy. I thought it was over Ukraine's territory.
Concepts.
Yeah, universal concepts that most people in the United States and in the United Kingdom or any other country where she's speaking to English speaking audiences, causes that they could get behind. Americans are not going to get behind the cause of the fight against the slave Mongol Asians. Yeah. And they shouldn't, because that's a stupid thing to fight for.
And they would never fight for it. They're fighting because they were invaded. Yeah. They would never They would never be like, oh no, we have to go get the slave.
Could you imagine when we met that International Legion guy who's going to be storming trenches tomorrow? Can you believe that? I couldn't imagine that type of a job. If we went up to him and when we asked him, why are you fighting? He didn't tell us, oh, because of all the terrible crimes of civilians. He said, well, I thought about, you know,
which is what he said.
About yeah, that's what he said. But instead he said, oh, you know, I thought about the slave Mongols. Like, no, that would be ridiculous. Nobody's going to come overseas to fight for that. And nobody should come overseas to fight for something that's stupid. So yeah, I think she deserved to be suspended, and honestly, I think she should be fired. I think she should be fired sooner rather than later, so they can stop putting her name in any way associated to the terror defense as a press spokesperson. If she wants to go out there and like get back in uniform and go back to defending trenches like she was doing, or she wants to go deliver aid, you know, that's another person contributing to the cause, whatever. But right now, this isn't contributing to the cause. This is actively working against the cause.
I wanted to add something. Like, who cares where Europe ends? This is something that I just find so frustrating. That
Alexander Dugin.
Yeah, well, but like we pretend that these concepts are not universal, or we want to say, oh, you know, it's democracy is like a Western cultural thing, and that's just such fucking bullshit. Like, look at the Korean Peninsula. You have the exact same culture, exact same background. Prior to during World War II and prior, same occupation by Japan. Same history.
Well, actually,
down to the most minute detail.
Not exactly. North Korea is more resource rich than South Korea.
Okay, fine. So that the only difference is how resource rich the land is, and you have a insane like slave system in the north, and then you have normal democracy where you have BTS coming from in the south. And it's just this
president of South Korea sucks though.
So many Europeans have this like idea about culture that is just like, it's sickening to me. And that's kind of like why I like living in America, because even like some of the most liberal French people will have these opinions, or other people in Europe will have these opinions about like what, like these national identity concepts that are just so stupid. Like they're terrified about losing, like the white identity of some of these countries when the birth rates are so low. And they keep talking about we're burdened with immigrants, but it's like what you're actually burdened with is the fact that nobody's having fucking kids, and that the average age of a person is drastically increasing in some places.
Look,
they need immigrants.
You can't.
They're after that immigrants.
You cannot want to defend your pensions tooth and nail while also not having somebody work in the younger demographic to be able to pay for those pensions. If they do not have the base, the economic base of the country, which is young working class people, then they're not going to be able to pay for the pensions that the elderly now rely on to live.
And my grandma still lives in France. She's very, very old, and thank fucking Christ that there's immigrants there. Holy shit, because she relies on people to help her, doctors, nurses, you know, people that are very highly educated professions, and people that are drivers also. And it's just this idea of like, what is Europe? Or we have to define what it is. It's like, just like, who gives a shit? Like the only things that should really matter are democracy and freedom and like fairness, you know?
True.
And that's what this war is about.
That's what this war is about. Anyway, Sarah Ashton, go smoke some weed and take a break and think about what you said.
Deliver some aid.
Go deliver some aid. But mostly go smoke some weed. Just go smoke some weed, please. Okay, that's enough of that.